Okay. All right. Well, welcome to our 10th session of the class on Jewish literacy. And tonight's session is on mysticism and Kabbalah. And I love this subject. I actually spent a couple of hours today listening to videos by Daniel Matt, and I'm going to give you links to those videos. So anyway, we'll get into Kabbalah, and I'll tell you why I love Kabbalah. I love studying Kabbalah. I love immersing myself in Kabbalah, but I am not a Kabbalist. I am not a practicing Kabbalist for reasons I will make clear. I would say there are aspects of Kabbalah which are elevating and indescribably insightful and majestic. And there are elements of Kabbalah which are, for me, and I emphasize for me, horrifying and outrageous. So how's that running the gamut of human emotion? Okay, let's dive into it. So actually, some of this is from a talk I give generally on Kabbalah. So some of it will be old hat to you. The idea basically, of course, that we've discussed dozens of times, that Jews are focused more on acts and actions than belief. 613 commandments in the first 5 books, including the Big Ten, and also love your neighbor, don't eat pork, ethical ones, pay wages promptly. And then I don't remember if I have a separate slide on this, the rabbis add thousands more. And also very important to Judaism is our focus is on this world rather than the next world. People sometimes ask me, what do Jews believe about the afterlife? My response is always, I don't know, go ask them. Jews believe lots of things. The thing that I can answer is, what does Judaism teach about the afterlife and about these topics? And there's a lot of things that Judaism teaches, but what people believe, I have no idea. Well, I have some ideas, but that's a different question. So, is there a question, or are you on? Okay.
All right. Yeah.
Okay. So, the word Kabbalah means the received, or even the receiving tradition. The goal in Kabbalah is to get closer to and even cleave to God, to develop a closer, very deeply personal relationship with God. It is built on top of Judaism. It is not an alternative to Judaism, but a much deeper practice of Judaism, and begins with Orthodox observance. So basically, the idea is, how do I get closer to God? How do I better align myself with God? Well, the good news is we have lots of instructions at our fingertips. They are the commandments. So that's an easy place to start, just 613 commandments. The rabbis add thousands more, namely, live an Orthodox lifestyle. Now the question is, that's nice, but are there ways I can even get closer to God? And the answer is, that's what Kabbalah is about. Pop Kabbalah is pop spirituality. It's Madonna, tattoos, red strings, and so on. And just as wearing a stethoscope doesn't make you a doctor, wearing a red string or getting a Kabbalistic tattoo or even owning a copy of the Zohar doesn't make you a Kabbalist. This is not supposed to be simple, easy, or even quickly understandable. You may recall the thing, my item or thought about being exposed to many difficult subjects in Judaism, even not so difficult subjects in Judaism, and that my own experience is I need to hear them about 10 times before I deeply understand them. Kabbalah is probably more like 15 or 20 times. And then, I wouldn't say I deeply understand them at all. I think I have about 125 or 130 books on Kabbalah, many of them right behind me. I have read most of them, sometimes more than once, and I'm just beginning to get it. So don't be dismayed if you find this confusing. and difficult. It is confusing and difficult. Understanding the nature of God shouldn't be easy. If God is anything like a God that we project God to be or understand God to be. Traditionally, Kabbalah was studied only by married male scholars that were over 40. And the issue is so that you don't abandon your responsibilities. The danger with Kabbalah is that you get so deep into meditation and contemplation of God that you never want to leave it. You just fall into this almost trance-like state that you never want to leave it. And so the idea is if you're married and mature, you will have earthly responsibilities that will bring you back, and you won't fall into the temptation to abandon your earthly responsibilities. This is part of I would say, a pervasive Jewish perspective, which says that the earthly, this world, is very important. The mitzvot of feeding, the hungry, clothing the naked, of loving people, of helping people, are all about this world. You can't go off to a monastery and just pray all day. I've been to monasteries. In fact, just outside of Auschwitz, the Vatican built a study center and a convent, and the nuns pray. And when asked, what are they doing that's helpful, their answer is they are praying. And they're praying for the souls of the departed, and they're praying, whatever they're praying for. And from their perspective, they are actually doing divine work and being helpful. From a Jewish perspective, it's not enough. A question is raised about books. I am going to make recommendations about books at the end. It should be someone of high moral standards, prior rabbinic learning, and mental emotional stability. And traditionally, Kabbalah was taught one-on-one, one student and one teacher. Part of the reason is this material was supposed to be esoteric, which means kept secret. And also, it's so easily misunderstood that, a lecture like this, or, an in-person lecture like this, believe me, it is my experience that people come away from my sermons and discussions believing I have said things that I know I didn't say. So traditionally, Kabbalah was taught one teacher with one student. The goal of this session is to provide an introduction and an orientation, and maybe to whet your appetite if you want to dig further. And just today I became aware of 2 90-minute lectures by Daniel Matt, and I'll say more about who he is, and I will put in the chat links to those lectures. As always, feel free to ask questions. So, questions I often get asked, is it Kabbalah or Kabbalah? And the answer is yes. Kabbalah is the Ashkenazi way of pronunciation of Hebrew, like Shabbos, or the prayer shawl being a tallis. And Kabbalah is the Sephardic way, also the way spoken in Israel, of pronouncing Hebrew, which would be talit and Shabbat. Ashkenazim are Jews of Eastern European origin. We'll be discussing the origins of these different cultural divisions in Judaism in a later class. And the Sephardim are Jews of Spanish and Middle Eastern origin. So here's something I know I have talked about that helps me understand what's going on here. And I describe it as the difference between magic and mystic. Magic suggests that if I follow all the commandments, pray correctly in Hebrew and Aramaic, use ritual objects, mezuzahs on all the doors, keep strictly kosher, obey all of these laws, the magical approach would be, then I can get God to do my will. And there's also, I guess, the flip side of that idea is if I don't do those things, God's going to get me. Rabbi Harold Kushner, in his book When Bad Things Happen to Good People, talks about a couple whose daughter was killed in a car accident, and the couple confessed to him that they didn't fast on the previous Yom Kippur. And so they were, I guess, fearful of the idea of, but wanted to know, was the reason their daughter was killed in a car accident because they didn't fast? And of course, that is definitely not part of Kushner's theology nor my theology. But that's the magical approach, I would say, to these kinds of subjects. The mystical approach is the same list of things to do. Follow the commandments, pray correctly, use ritual objects, keep kosher, do all of these things. And if you work hard enough at doing all of those things, you can get yourself to do God's will. Ultimately, mysticism, Kabbalah, is about more closely aligning yourself to God. And I guess part of it would be discerning, what is it that God wants of me? Speaking of magic, I just have some fun things to add from time to time. You've heard the word abracadabra. It's from the Aramaic, avra kadavra, which means I create as I speak. Perfect flourish for a magician to, turn the bowl of fruit into a rabbit. And so someone attending a class, this is from a talk I give about Hebrew, suggested maybe this was God's flourish before creating the universe. Before our Torah, God said, abracadabra, stand back. This is going to be good. Mysticism and Kabbalah, of course, are always discussed, I would say, within the context of Jewish spirituality. Jewish spirituality is, I don't know if it's unique, but it is singularly focused on sacred text. The presumption, and we're going to see this over and over again, and we were having discussion in my little chat room today, office hours, about this. The presumption is that sacred texts, Torah, Talmud, Zohar, and so on, are love letters, are messages from God, and they are infinitely deep and full of meaning. And we use different filters, we use different techniques for learning the depth of meaning that God is trying to communicate to us in these texts. As the rabbis say, if the Torah was all about stories, I could write better stories, they would say. Shakespeare writes better stories than Torah. But as you'll see, the mystical idea is the simple meaning. The story is a very surface meaning, and there are many, 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 many subliminal meanings, and there are ways of teasing out these meanings, and we use techniques. Some of them are mathematical, some of them are grammatical, some of them are topological, dealing with shapes of letters. I love to think of these texts, say Torah, as a singular love letter from God. I may have mentioned this before. Imagine you're on the proverbial desert island and you have one very long letter from the love of your life to you. And you're never going to get another letter from that person. You would reread that letter over and over again. If certain words are underlined, you would wonder what your lover is trying to say. If certain letters are bigger than others, or even upside down, you would wonder what was my lover thinking? That's the way we study Torah. I was once teaching this, and a woman came up to me after class, and she said, "This happened to me." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And she said, "Well, I broke up with a guy. I had a really long and intense relationship with this guy, and we broke up, and he wrote me a letter breaking up. And in the letter, he wrote me the line, 'You are very,'" and she couldn't tell because of his handwriting whether he said, "You are very lonely," or "very lovely." If you think of cursive, you can see how that might be ambiguous. And it drove her nuts, and she didn't have the courage to call him and ask him. But she read that over and over and over and over again. That's how we read Torah. So we're going to look at some texts. But first, we're actually going to look at the way the Torah looks. And I may have covered this before. I can never remember. I do so much of this, I can't remember what. So, what I've been through with you. So this is the way a Torah scroll looks at the very beginning. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashemayim ve'et haaretz. So one of the things the Kabbalists are going to look at in this text is ask the question, why does the Torah begin with the letter Bet? Now, I fully recognize had the Torah begin with another letter, you'd be asking the same question, but it begins with the letter Bet. So there are midrashim, rabbinic explanations of this, and there are many of them. I'm just going to give you two. One is, look at the shape of the letter Bet. I'm going to go back. Here we are with the letter Bet. There's only one way forward, this way. If you try and ask what's above the Torah, it's impossible to go there. If you try and ask what's below the Torah, it's impossible to go there. If you try and ask what happened before the Torah, it's impossible to go there. So one reason the Torah begins with the letter Bet is to teach you to just go forward. This is not so different than the Big Bang. Also, to teach that there are two Torahs. The letter Bet is the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet and stands for the number 2. So another reason the first letter of the Torah is Bet is to teach us that there are two revelations: a written revelation, the written Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, and an oral Torah, meaning the origin of Mishnah and Talmud. So that's just 2 reasons. There are many, many more reasons. This I think I've also covered with you. I hope I have. Pointing out that we can't simply translate the Bible. The first 2 words of the Bible present a grammatical problem. Bereshit bara Elohim, often translated in the beginning, God created. But if we wanted to say in the beginning, we wouldn't say Bereshit, we would say Berishana. Bereshit is a Hebrew grammatical form called the construct form, and it means in the beginning of. And according to the rules of Hebrew grammar, we need a noun to follow it immediately. But we don't have a noun following it immediately. We have a verb, bara, God created. So if I were trying to translate it literally, I might say, in the beginning of, God created the heavens and the earth. Maybe God wasn't so good at Hebrew grammar. Of course, the rabbis would reject that. Maybe it's a scribal error. The rabbis would also reject that. Or maybe God was trying to teach us something. And what Rashi and the other rabbis of tradition say God was trying to teach us here is that you can't simply translate. If you try and directly translate the Torah, you get stuck between word 1 and word 2. Murray.
What do you get if you put a space between the aleph and the shin for the first word to make it into 2 words? What would that say?
Well, it would be bara, he created, and then I don't know what shin yud taf would mean.
Okay.
But that's exactly the way the rabbis would approach this.
So maybe shin yud taf used to mean something?
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of possibilities. But the rabbis of tradition would say the text that we have is perfect and the word of God. I will give you something which I think is pretty cool, which you may think is nuts. This is a mystical look because this is, we'll just call it in the beginning, created God. Okay, the word order is a little strange. That is actually allowed in English. You can have, you can have that in very formal English as well. But one of the mystical interpretations is with Reshit, and in another place, the word Reshit seems to stand for wisdom. With Reshit, it was created God. The word it is always understood in verbs. So this is actually reversing creation. And in the Zohar, in the mystical tradition, we're talking about what preceded even the creation of God. So there's I don't remember exactly where they go in the Zohar with this, but they're going to say with wisdom, with a spark of wisdom. Actually, Erwin will like this. Now I remember, with Ein Sof, with out end, the infinite no thing God. We'll talk about this further. The nothingness of God, the absolutely unknowable element of God, which on paper would look like a blank. So with that was created God. God meaning the knowable aspects of God.
You
So
showed a slide or two ago a picture of what the beginning of the Torah might look
yes,
like, and I know that there are no vowels.
yes.
Also, did they actually have spaces, or were they really trying to conserve space?
There are some Torah texts where the spaces are much more limited, and some scholars say that's why some Hebrew words have final values so you can more easily read them. Erwin.
And my understanding is, according to Kabbalah, Torah was created before God created the world.
One mystical insight is that just as a builder needs plans to build a building, so God needed plans to create the universe. So so that Torah was created before the physical universe. But in this mystical interpretation, Ein Sof, the unknowable element of God, created the lower Sefirot. And I know you don't know what I'm talking about, but we'll get there today. And I promise you will be more confused after we get there. Let's continue. So one thing I think we've also talked about in Genesis 1:26, the first creation story, God says, let us make humanity in our image after our likeness. When I've discussed this in the past, I've talked about who was God talking to when he says, let us make humanity in our image. Traditional Jewish answer, God was talking to the heavenly hosts, the angels, whoever it is, hang out with God in the celestial spheres. Traditional Christian answer, God was talking to God's triune self, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Modern answer I really like, God was talking to the animals. Kabbalistic answer I just heard today, God was talking to the other levels of the Sefirot. We're going to get there, don't worry. But I want to focus on another element of this. It says B'Tselmenu. Tzel can mean shadow as well as image. So if we are created in God's image, what does that tell us about God? I'm going to actually ask if anyone wants to share a thought on this. If we take this idea seriously, that we are created in God's image, what does that tell us about God? And what does that tell us about ourselves?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Rachel.
Yeah, I've shared with this with you once before. What the way I see it is that all we know about God so far in the Torah is that God is a creator and God is an appreciator. I made this, it's good. I made that, it's good. And to me, that implies that humans are or should be to be our highest selves after God, to create and appreciate.
So what I hear you saying more generally is to say that we're created in the image of God means that we should share, we do share some of the characteristics that we learn are part of God. Bryce.
Well, I don't think that it's to be taken literally as that we look like God. Okay, I think that the image is metaphorical, and the likeness is metaphorical, And the idea, at least to me, is that we share with God a desire to create things, because people make things as well.
Mhm.
And the whole idea of what something is good is it's good to purpose. All
Mhm.
right, and that we share with this God certain personality and psychological aspects,
Okay.
including emotions.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I will say that the Kabbalists will also take the idea of the image of God not only metaphorically. They will take it metaphorically, but not only metaphorically. So again, this is the answer I like, is God was talking to the animals. And basically, this is a proof text for evolution. God says to the rest of created world at this point in time, let us make humanity. So God is going to use the evolutionary DNA process, natural selection, to create humanity. So here's the question: does God have an image? The biblical portrayal of God is very anthropomorphic. God speaks. Many people see God, even though in other passages we are told you cannot see God and live. There are passages like Exodus 24:10 where people absolutely see God and they live. God's nose gets red. The Hebrew idiom for God getting angry is God's nose gets red. And you could say, well, it's an idiom, but the text itself is anthropomorphic. God takes us out of Egypt with an outstretched hand. It doesn't say as if with an outstretched hand. It says with an outstretched hand. Therefore, God has a hand and the ability to stretch it out. The Jewish philosophers like Maimonides stress that this should not be taken literally, that the Torah speaks in the language of people, and therefore, certainly the philosophers after Maimonides would say God is spirit only, not body and substance at all. And the Kabbalists will do that to some degree, but they also go overboard in the opposite direction. One way to assign an image to God is idol worship. To assign 5 million different images to God, same God, is a way of glorifying God. Murray. Whoops. Murray, where'd you go? There you are. Murray, did you have a question?
Sorry about that.
Okay.
Sometimes I think of image as a copy, and for example, as a physicist, all electrons are the same. I mean, they are exact copies, which always confounds me.
Mm-hmm.
But to say that humans are the image of God, we are not all the same. We are not copies of each other. We're not clones. So can that possibly say anything about God being like,
well,
the sum of the sum is more than the parts, or something like that?
Well, there is a story or a midrashic teaching, probably Talmudic, saying how great is God when a human mints coins, all the coins are identical. When God minted people in God's image, we are all individual. So the question is, what is it about all the faces you see on the screen that constitute the fact that they are images of God? Sorry, Vicky, we're not going to include your dogs. That's we're not saying they are absolutely identical. Would you say 2 newly minted pennies are identical, Murray?
Well, they don't have the wave duality function of an electron, where an electron can become a wave again and
Would someone instruct Murray to answer the question? Murray, are 2 newly minted pennies identical?
No.
I didn't ask you, Bryce.
Are they identical in what manner? Are they identical in appearance? Yes. I couldn't tell one from the other unless one had a scratch on it.
So they don't have the same number of atoms, right?
How should I be able to know that?
That's a separate question. What would you say the likelihood is that they have the exact same number of atoms?
In the same state.
We'll forget the same state, but
well, that's a macroscopic object. Electrons are, much more fundamental. It's a fundamental particle. As
Okay,
they say.
what I'm saying is that two newly minted pennies, most of us would say are identical, but a atomic physicist would not say that they're necessarily identical. So you would say we're all very different looking in people. In some way, we are all the image or the shadow of God. David.
In the TV series Saint Elsewhere, one of the guys is busy dying and he comes and stands before the throne of God, and the actor plays both the guy and God. And the guy says to God, "You look just like me." And God said, "Of course, I made you in my image." So it depends on which end of it you come from. But if God made us in his image, then every time you see God, it looks just like you.
That would be one way of interpreting the word "we are created," or that God made the first human in God's image, male and female, he created them. So let's see what the Kabbalists make of this. So on one level, there are Kabbalistic texts which take the idea of a physical image of God quite seriously. And so there's a text, 6th century Shur Koma, which actually has in different units, in ancient units, I've translated them here, the size of God's feet, God's neck size, circumference of God's head, length of God's beard, each finger, the black of God's eye. And I suppose that could change depending on how much light God is exposed to. But in any event,
his beard is the size of his eye.
I'm sorry? Yeah.
It says that the beard is the same size as the eye.
Yes.
Black
Yeah.
of
So
the
this
eye.
is not a normal proportion. I'm just pointing out that there are texts that take the image of God literally. Moving on, a Kabbalist looking at a prayer that you either know or will get to know, the Shema. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. And I'm sure I taught this before. You can focus on this question of what does the word Echad mean? God will be one because the verb is not in there. Does Adonai Echad mean Adonai alone? Adonai is one, that there's one indivisible Adonai, that Adonai is unique, ultimate, or unity, or everything. The Hebrew, being wonderfully ambiguous, can incorporate all these meanings. I have this book I've mentioned before called Echad, The Many Meanings of God is One, with 25 essays on the meaning of that one word. But as we will see, one of those interpretations, that God, the last one, that God is unity and everything, is going to greatly influence Kabbalah. The meaning of the word Yisrael, the idea that we wrestle with God. Jacob gets his name changed from heel, Yaakov, to Yisrael, one who wrestles with God. If you struggle with God, if you struggle with these texts, welcome to the club. That's what we do. We argue with God, we scream at God, but we never disengage. One of my teachers would say that the worst sin is not hating God or cursing God. The worst sin is ignoring God. There is mystical meaning even in the calligraphy of the Shema. This is the way it would appear in a Torah text or in your mezuzah. With the ayin, the last letter of the word Shema, which is an ayin, and the daled written large. So the question is why? One thing is the word ayin daled stands for the word aid, which means witness, as in Adat Elohim, the witnesses of God, or the congregation of God. Aid can also mean congregation. So this prayer becomes a witness, our central declaration of faith in God. The large ayin, this letter ayin is silent. There's another silent letter, aleph. So one of the ways of interpreting it is by drawing it large, we are sure to understand it as Shema, meaning listen, Israel, rather than Shema, which is an Aramaic word, which means perhaps Israel, God is one. And the large daled helps us distinguish this letter from the other letter that looks like it, which is resh, because if we read this as aleph chet resh, we get the word acher, which means another. So there's another God. So again, there's calligraphic traditions which have mystical meaning. The mystics focus on this word echad in the Shema, in the central declaration of Jewish faith, as meaning unity. So Adonai Echad means God is unity. God is the ultimate unity of the universe. Let me finish the slide and I'll call on you, Bryce. Everything is God and God is everything. The separations are illusions. Like a wave seems to be a distinct entity, but is reality one with the sea? And various parts of the tree, we may give names like leaf and twig and branch and trunk and roots and so on, but the tree doesn't know where the leaf ends and the branch begins. It's one unified thing. I give myself a name, but I have blood cells, I have bone cells, I have, all kinds of neurons and so on. So I'm a mass of things, but they are all me. So the mystical idea is the entire universe is God. It's all part of God. That is not to say that a tree is God, that we should worship the tree, but that we understand the tree as being part of God. Bryce.
Could you go back to the previous slide?
Sure.
So it just a drosh that occurred to me, that if the last word would be interpreted as another, okay, and back when there were multiple gods in Israeli worship or in Hebrew worship, then changing the resh subtly to a dalid is a way of changing the meaning of the text to correspond to a monotheistic interpretation.
Yeah, that presupposes that at one point the text did say acher.
Well, we don't know, but I'm just saying that that's just
Okay.
a drosh
Yes.
on that.
Yes. So that's a reasonable drosh. Basically, to avoid that drosh, to avoid that interpretation, the tradition is to make the dalid very large.
Understand.
Oops, let's see. Okay. Okay. So when I count to 3, point to God. No time to think. 1, 2, 3. I don't see you pointing. Okay, cowards.
I did it.
So some of you did point. Thank you. So there are 2 valid Jewish reasonable ways to address the question of our relationship with God. The first one, which is very normative, is that somehow God is up there in heaven and I'm down here and we're separate. So whenever we use the phrase Baruch Atah Adonai, which we use in every blessing, we use the word Atah. The word Atah means you. Blessed are you, Adonai. Once I use the word blessed are you, I am making a distinction between me and you. So a very normative, normal, reasonable Jewish way to understand God is that God is a separate entity to be worshiped, to be praised, to be beseeched, to, in biblical times, feed, to put offerings up for. That is a reasonable, rational, standard Jewish way of imaging God. Hang on. The mystical, so here's God and here's me. The mystics would say, God is everywhere and everything. In fact, there's no way to display it on the screen, so I've used dashed lines here. And there's me. My separation from God is an illusion, also indicated by dashes. So we are all part of God and we are all connected to God. As I was listening to this lecture by Danny Matt today, he talked about a baby's understanding, and maybe he was saying that this is one of the understandings of the Garden of Eden, that a baby's understanding is, particularly in early months, and some of you are psychologists and you can chime in with a more professional opinion than this, that they don't really understand that they are separate from their mother. They are one with their mother. And as they get older and more mature, they understand a separation. There's mom and there's me. In a way, as Dr. Matt put it, he said babies are natural Kabbalists because they believe themselves connected to everything, whereas the rest of us have to work on it. Erwin, you are muted. Erwin, going once. I'm not sure. Okay, I'm gonna lower your hand, Erwin. But just chime in when you have a question. Rachel.
The statement about God is everything and everything is God, and this Kabbalistic image, isn't that kind of what Spinoza was excommunicated for?
Yes, and I'm not an expert on Spinoza, but there's a lot of commonality with that. But remember, Spinoza is probably responding to the rationalists, and it's the rationalists that are. So I don't know enough about Spinoza to know where he would differ from the Kabbalists. Carson, are you chiming in on Spinoza?
Yeah, not Spinoza, but I will say that this idea, what you have on the screen now, is also very in line with a Taoist and Zen Buddhist philosophy.
So one of the things that I've heard Danny Matt say, and I've taken a bunch of classes with him, is that he often feels much more connected with Buddhist, Hinduist, Christian mystics than with, say, the more rational branches of Judaism. Erwin.
Yeah, what I would like to say is that when two individuals meet and they get married, two separate person becomes one. And that is also the interpretation with God, with your me, within inside of God. So that is also a Kabbalistic interpretation of we become one from two separate individuals.
Yeah, I mean, the Torah speaks of wanting to become one flesh. I think they're probably referring to sexuality. I mean, I have felt very close to Sonia, but I have no question that she is a separate person. We've even become one flesh from time to time, but I won't go further than that since this is going to be posted. And I've already maybe gone too far. So, a mystic's understanding of free will. The mystics understand that since everything is God, then everything is under God's control and everything is just as it should be. As my teacher Larry Kushner points out, this is a theology, I think he would say, that shouldn't be brought within 100 yards of a hospital, because it says not only meeting your love and everything is the will of God, and the flowers blooming in the morning and the rainbow after the rain, but also the cancer, the accident, even the war, the Holocaust, gas chambers, COVID are under the control and the will of God, and the universe is playing itself out exactly as God intends it. I personally have great difficulty with this, and this is, just speaking personally and autobiographically, this is a barrier from me becoming a Kabbalist. I don't believe this, but I am certain that the Kabbalists believe this. And how you work out free will under this situation is difficult. What I think what they would say is free will is an illusion. We believe we have free will, but in fact our free will choice is already known by God, and everything's going according to the way God plans it to go. On some level, this is comforting, because what it tells you is things are really okay. Things look bad now, but there's a reason that you're going through this suffering, this pain, and so on. And God knows that reason. And maybe in this life and maybe in the next life, we will have an understanding of why these things have happened. I often have people come to me and in the aftermath of terrible things happening in their life say, this is a horrible thing. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. But now having gone through this, you know, I have a much deeper appreciation for life, for what it is I'm supposed to do in life. And I can really understand the reason for this happening. People all the time will tell me after something, sometimes good, sometimes bad, the reason for something happening the way it happened. So I don't accept this theologically as part of my own belief system, but I absolutely understand how this can be comforting psychologically. And I absolutely understand that this is what the Kabbalists are teaching. And my goal tonight is not to teach you what I believe, but to teach you what Kabbalah says about these things. So we move to texts, and the Zohar is the central text of Jewish mysticism, and it's not small. Here's a collection of Zohar. This book is the one on the right, the Zohar, the Pritzker edition, written by Danny Matt. And the story about this is one of his students, probably 20 years ago or more than 20 years, because I've been a rabbinic student for 20 years, rabbi. So before that, he had come up with some other books like this one. And he had a bunch of books like this. And I'm going to list these books at the end. The Essential Kabbalah, which are a few stories, you know, from the Zohar, and some annotations and explanations. And so one of his students of the Pritzker family, a very wealthy family, said to him, you know, what's a good English translation and commentary on the Zohar? And he said, there isn't any. And so she said, well, why don't you write it? And he said, it would probably take 25 years and a team of, you know, research assistants and scholars to do that. And she said, fine, I will fund it. And that's what he spent the last 20 or 25 years doing. And you'll see some of his work, but he's brilliant. And it is not an easy task to translate and comment on this text. The Zohar is a work of pseudepigrapha. Pseudepigrapha is an English word. It is the opposite of plagiarism. Plagiarism is copying someone else's work and claiming it is yours. Pseudepigrapha is writing something and claiming someone else wrote it. So why in the world would anybody do that? Because if you're living in 13th century Spain and you publish a work, you're, you know, Rabbi Moses de Leon, and you publish your own commentary on Torah, ho-hum, big deal, who needs another commentary on Torah? But if you claim that you have found ancient manuscripts with a mystical commentary on Torah written in the 2nd century by Shimon Bar Yochai, that's a big deal. And so if you ask a Chabad rabbi, I believe the Chabad rabbi would say the Zohar is written in the 2nd century by Shimon Bar Yochai, but I would say the only scholarly dispute about whether it was written in 13th century Spain was whether it was written by Moshe de Leon or with a group of his students. And you know, there's some examples of even medieval Spanish words creeping into the text. And that might be consistent with the idea that he copied it. He just let the Spanish words creep in, but it's written in 2nd century Aramaic, the Aramaic that was spoken in the Holy Land in the 2nd century. It's structured as a commentary on Torah. Remember, the Jewish basic idea is all truth, all wisdom is in the Torah. The question is, how do we dig into the Torah to get these truths and insight out. So if you want to write something brilliant, what you want to write is a commentary on the Torah, because all the wisdom is in the Torah. What is brilliant is gaining insights into the Torah. In this text, we read of a brilliant rabbi of 2,000 years ago wandering the Galilee with disciples. Does this sound familiar to anyone? Anybody know the name of that other rabbi?
Jesus.
Exactly. What's going on in 13th century Spain at the time? Horrible Spanish persecution of the Jews. So, in the name of Christianity. So all of a sudden you have a mystical interpretation of Torah that says, oh, by the way, during roughly this same time period, we had our guy wandering the Galilee with magnificent insights and interpretations about God. The Zohar provides a structure to the study and practice of Kabbalah. It introduces the 10 Sefirot, which we'll get to in a moment, and is very difficult. Here's an example of how difficult it is. This is the Zohar's commentary on the moment of creation. I'm just going to read it because it's fun to read. At the head of the potency of the king, he engraved engravings in luster on high. A spark of impenetrable darkness flashed within the concealed of the concealed. From the head of infinity, a cluster of vapor forming in formlessness, thrust in a ring, not white, not black, not red, not green, no color at all. As a cord surveyed, it yielded radiant colors. Deep within the spark gushed a flow, splaying colors below, concealed within the concealed of the mystery of Ein Sof. It split and did not split its aura, and was not known at all until under the impact of splitting, a single concealed supernal point shone. Beyond this point, nothing is known, so it is called Reshit, beginning, first command of all. This translation in the book I just showed you is accompanied by 3 full pages of 13 footnotes to help you understand what was just read. And remember, the original is in Aramaic, so that's not easy to read to begin with. No punctuation, no capitalization. Okay, the Sefirot. This is something after years and years and years and years, I am getting more and more insight into, but I still don't fully understand it. I want to introduce you to the Sefirot. So I believe part of what's going on here is taking the phrase that humanity was created in the image of God. Therefore, say the Kabbalists, says the Zohar, in some sense, God must resemble humanity. So here's an example of that. So you have the Sefirot. What are the Sefirot? The Sefirot are emanations. They are ways in which God interacts with the world. They are characteristics of God. So I know you can't read it, but for example, here is wisdom, here is understanding, here is power and judgment and love and grace, beauty, compassion, prophecy, but also a right leg, splendor, and also a left leg, foundation, tzaddik, a righteous one, covenant, and also a phallus, and presence of God, the kingdom of God, the communion of Israel, the earth, the moon, the queen, the apple orchard, the rainbow, the Shekhinah, also understood as the feminine aspect of God or the goddess. One of the, so this is really esoteric, but the basic idea, and Erwin is always discussing this, that up above this is something called Ein Sof. Ein Sof means without end. It is not a thing. It is nothing, but that's not a pejorative. There is no thingness to the essence of God. So in the beginning, before the beginning, the universe is all God and only God, and there is no physical aspect, just Ein Sof. And now the question is, or the interesting point is, God wants to interact with humanity. You can't interact with no thing. You have to interact with a sense of interrelationship and characteristics. And so the Sefirot, as I understand it, are the characteristics of God with which we interact. And the story, which is interesting, is the highest element is Keter, the crown, which is also, I'm sorry, Keter is called nothingness. The nothingness beyond the nothingness, Ein Sof, is even less of a thing than nothing. So at the top is just a crown. It's a concept. And then the idea is a spark, a seed. That was that seed that we were describing in that very complicated paragraph, gets inserted into the world. Where does it get inserted? Into a womb. So we have the queen mother here, which is Bina, understanding. And she is understood as a womb who, having been impregnated with the seed, then gives birth to the lower Sefirot. In biblical Judaism, the word Shekhinah is used, but it's understood to mean the presence of God. It's actually not in biblical Judaism, sorry, it's in the Talmud. The presence of God, the God that we sense and we interact with, is called Shekhinah. It comes from the word Shechona, which means neighborhood or presence. The Mishkan comes from the same Hebrew root. The Mishkan is the tabernacle, the portable sanctuary in the desert. So when the Talmud speaks of the aspect of God with which we humans or we Jews interact and feel as a presence in our lives, we are talking about the Shekhinah. The Hebrew word Shekhinah is a feminine word. It ends with a feminine ending. So one element of this is the goddess. And the male, one of the representatives of the male aspect of God is Tiferet, connected with Shekhinah through a phallus, through Yesod. And when everything was perfect, God, this 10 Sefirot were perfectly unified. And with various things going wrong in the world, one of which is the Garden of Eden, eating of the fruit. Another is the destruction of the temple. God's male and female aspects get separated. So one of our goals is to try and reconnect the unity of God. So this is a little puzzling because when we chant the Shema, we say God is unity. We say Adonai Echad, but in every service, we end the service by saying, Bayom Hahu, on some day in the future, Yihya Adonai Echad, God will be one, Ushemo Echad, and his name will be one. So there's a sense in which God is unified, and there's a sense in which God is not quite unified. The male and female aspects of God, we'll see some vivid and sexual images of that. So imagery, not actual images, later toward the end of the presentation. And the way I heard Danny Matt described it today, mitzvot are the divine aphrodisiac. When we do mitzvot in this world, we provide an aphrodisiac to God's male and female aspects to get them to join. And that is the way things should be. They should be joined. And ultimately, with the redemption, with the end of history, coming of the Messiah, God will actually be one again. Don't worry, this is not on the test. All I want you to do is be aware of, if you delve in Kabbalah at all, you will see this image over and over and over again. And also one commentary on the sort of Jewish critique of Christianity as saying that God is three is the Kabbalists would say God has 10 aspects. Christianity would say God is three elements in one. That's what the idea of Trinity means. The mystics would say God is 10 elements in one. Angela, you're muted.
Thank you. It may just be a coincidence, but I see a lot of similarities with the form and the idea within Hinduism and the chakras. And actually, some of the characteristics that you're describing are similar to the ideas of the chakras and putting your mind toward those things.
Yeah, I know virtually nothing about chakras, except I often hear people say that in connection with this image. So yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. Murray.
Yeah, I mean, I look at the image on the left and I say to myself, had you told me that this is the latest diagram of up quarks and neutrons and electrons, I wouldn't even blink an eye.
Okay.
Meaning, I mean, this can possibly mean anything. I mean, but it would be very prescient if it
Yeah. So actually,
had in that, since we're finding out that to be what we call the truth, that this truth should have been the truth even back then when this was first developed.
so one of the things, when you look at the creation story interpreted mystically, it has a lot in common with the Big Bang. And, in the lecture I was listening to today, Danny Matt says, we shouldn't sort of think that, the mystics were prescient or the Bible was prescient in or had insights into the Big Bang. So that's probably overreaching. But I'm with you. I can't ignore the similarities in the story. Erwin and then Bryce.
Uh, I I think what is also important to realize that the 10 Sefirot through Keter is perfectly balanced. And if we break the balance of that, that's when things go bad. So we have to balance our life, our behaviors and everything. And that's what these 10 Sefirot teaches us.
I would say it's one of the things that it teaches us. So very specifically, a balance between love and power. If we're
Yes.
too much on one side, we are out of balance. Bryce.
So each one of these graphs is connected differently,
Yes.
okay? And
I
is
don't-
there significant meaning in the layout of the three graphs? Do they each mean something different?
Yes. Any other questions? I have no idea what those significant meanings are. I shouldn't say I have no idea, but I'm sure that there's intentionality behind those connections. Jay.
What does the word Sefirot mean?
It comes from the word to count, like 7 countable things. There's nothing deeply, at least to my knowledge, there's nothing deeply mystical. The verb saper just simply means to count.
Why would they call this the Sefirot?
I don't know. Another key individual in the story of Kabbalah is Isaac Luria. Isaac Luria was, with his family, expelled from Spain, dies, I think, in his late 30s in Sfat in Israel. Was only there 2.5 years. He's called the Ha'ari, which is an acronym for Ha'ashkenazi Rabbi Yitzchak. The word Ari means lion. He wrote down almost nothing, but his students wrote down a lot. And something you will often hear in connection with Kabbalah is the Lurianic Kabbalistic teaching about creation. I'll say this again. This is a Kabbalistic understanding of creation as taught by Rabbi Luria. And so basically, here's the idea. In the beginning, before the beginning, there was all God and only God. You can argue. You could say it's Ein Sof. There's without end. Ein Sof means infinite. Ein means not. It's a negation, and Sof means end. So this means without end. God decides to create a physical universe, And it's a whole fun story about why did God decide to create a physical universe? Was it a good idea or a bad idea? How is it working out in your neighborhood? You know, those are interesting questions that are discussed. But God decides to create a physical universe. So the Lurianic Kabbalah account of this is God picks a spot somewhere in the universe. And I'm going to tell you exactly where that is in a moment. And contracts. God creates just like some of you women have created with contractions. God picks a spot and contracts, which is to say, draws away, because in the beginning, it's all God and only God. So God has to make room for a physical universe. So God has to withdraw to some degree to allow room for a physical universe. And into that spot, God creates the Sefirot and starts pouring divine light into the physical universe through the Sefirot. These are Hebrew words, the names of each of the Sefirot. And there is a divine accident that occurs. God creates vessels to hold the divine light, but because the vessels are, I guess, natural matter, they are insufficiently capable of holding the divine light, and the vessels shatter. This is called in Kabbalah Shevirat Kelim. The withdrawal is called Tzimtzum. How many of you saw the movie, The Life of Pi? Remember the tiger in the boat? The name of the boat was Tzimtzum. If you read the book particularly, but even watch the movie, after you've studied Kabbalah a few years, you will see the author is heavily influenced by Kabbalah. So where is that spot that God decided to create the universe? In Jewish tradition, it's right there. It is called the foundation stone, the Even Hashtiyah. In Jewish biblical tradition, this stone, you know, it's the old story. What do you think is under the dome of the rock? A rock. In Jewish tradition, the rock is the place where Abraham took Isaac to be sacrificed. In Muslim tradition, it's where the Prophet Muhammad begins his night flight from earth to the heavens. And in Jewish mystical tradition, this is the spot of the foundation of the universe. And in peaceful times, like when I lived in Israel for a year, you could actually go down a stairway into the center of the rock and stand there. They won't let you sit down, and they won't let you pray unless you're a Muslim praying. But I have spent hours in this spot. And one of the most magical moments for me in my life is when Sonia and I spent time together in the midst of the center of the universe. So the idea is the vessels shatter, and the light that was poured into it is released, and some of it is trapped inside the shards of the vessels. And the imagery is every time a Jew does a mitzvah, a little bit of the divine light is released into the world, and a little bit of the universe is repaired. So there's this divine cosmic accident that occurs at the moment of creation, and God needs us. God cannot do the repair job. So here is another amazingly profound, astounding, I'm not sure what other adjectives I can throw in, insight of Kabbalah. And that is that God cannot get this work done by God's self. Humanity as God's partner is the only way God gets to repair certainly this world, the universe. If life is discovered on other planets, we'll have to expand the Kabbalah to embrace that. But it's a very profound insight, and it doesn't sound particularly pious or Jewish or, you know, reflecting on the grandeur of God to say God can't do the job by God's self. God needs humanity. One of Abraham Joshua Heschel's most famous book is called God in search of man. So we call this repair of the universe tikkun olam. I would say it's a centerpiece of Reform Judaism, where it's understood as the work of social justice, of, you know, curing disease, feeding the hungry, and so on. Our efforts as God partner are required to bring about the Messiah and redemption. So God, you know, it's kind of like a big puzzle, a jigsaw puzzle. God creates this jigsaw puzzle and turns over to us the job of completing the puzzle. Just as if you have a child and the child is putting together a puzzle or a model airplane or whatever, you could probably do a better job than the child can. But if you do it for the child doesn't get anything. The child doesn't grow. The child doesn't become capable. So what do? You withdraw. You know, if you're teaching your child to walk, you don't hold the child's hands 24 hours a day. You withdraw, tzimtzum, and let the child come to you. So that's this mystical insight about withdrawal as an educational and instructive foundation. And it's, you know, I think it's revolutionary. So some other insights. I think I probably talked about this before. The Hebrew word for angel is malach, which is the same as the Hebrew word for messenger. In the Bible, we see messengers showing up. They're called malachim or malach, and they are clear that it's an angel from God. They sometimes turn into God, and you hear God speaking through the angel, or just God is present. There's kind of a morphing back and forth. I would say the central teaching of Judaism is that God sends us into the world to l'taken olam b'malchut Shaddai, to repair the world under the rulership of God. So in doing this work, when you who are working as educators, as medical professionals, as psychologists, as engineers, as comedians, as actors, as poets, as singers, when you are making the world a little bit better, is this just something you're doing? Or are you an angel from God? Speaking Hebrew, we can't tell the difference. The Jewish understanding is that God sends us into the world to do this holy work. And it isn't, you know, always Mother Teresa or, you know, a mystical rabbi. Anyone that works to make the world a better place, I would say in Jewish thought, is an angel. Remember earlier, I talked about the idea that the word, when it says we're created b'tselem Elohim, it can mean the image of God, or it can mean the shadow of God. So this is an insight that I love. If you look at these shadows, can you tell anything about the things that are casting the shadow? Yes, there's clearly 3 people there and a smaller person. And they look like they're having a good time. And, you know, you could probably say it's sunset and so on. So the shadow and its source are deeply linked. So this leads to the mystical idea that if we, God's shadows, force God's hands by our action. So by making harmony on earth, we make harmony in the heavens. And I would say when we do good things inspired by God, or inspired by grandparents who were inspired by God, or inspired by a United States Constitution that was inspired by the Bible and by God, when we do these things as God's shadows, we are in effect forcing God to do work in the world. When I go to visit someone under hospice care, and I help comfort the person who is dying, or the person who is caring for the person who is dying, or just someone who is sick, and make them feel a little better, I bring God into the room. Of that I have no doubt. We can have doubts and discussions about whether God exists, but the person in the room feels comforted and feels addressed by God. And more importantly, the person is visited. The person gets food, the person gets medicine, because I, inspired by God, am doing that. So God works in the world when we work in the world, because we, God's shadows, force the image of God to do so. So I had this insight once while reciting Kaddish actually at a Yom Kippur service. And there was a lady in the front row who was just bereft and in agony because she had just lost her husband. And it struck me, her husband has disappeared from this world. If her husband is the shadow of God, when does a shadow disappear? And it struck me that a shadow disappears when the thing that made the shadow and the shadow become one. So when we become one with the Holy One, that's when our earthly presence disappears. The comment about the afterlife, what do Jews believe about the afterlife? I don't know, go ask them. What do we teach? That there is one. Major teaching of rabbinic Judaism is that a teaching of physical resurrection, namely, we physically emerge from our graves and are rejoined with our soul in the day of the coming of the Messiah. The mystics, the Kabbalists, believed in taught reincarnation, that our souls make various gilguls, they would call them. It literally means turns. And they come into this world, and you do a certain amount of work in this world, and then you die, and you go to a storehouse, and then an angel sends you, God with an angel sends you back into this world, and you do more work and more learning and die. And one of the sweetest elements of this teaching, and I understand it's also in Buddhism or some sects of Buddhism, there's a lot of different Buddhist branches, is the idea that groups of souls hang out together. I love this idea. I have no idea how they know it's true, but that in this world, you know who your parents are, your siblings and your dear friends and your lover and so on. In your next Gilgul, it's going to be the same group of souls. It may be, you and your lover are now brother and sister, or business partners, or dear friends, or something. I love this idea. I have no idea whether it's true or not. I have no idea how they get it. I bet if I studied more Kabbalah, I would get it. But I love it. And also the idea that communication between worlds is real. And I say this at every funeral, that I, who have been a rabbi now, I'm coming up on 17 and a half years, was a physicist before, someone for whom mysticism and spirituality does not come naturally. I've seen too many examples of communication between worlds to deny that possibility. And when people pass on, I always encourage them to be open for signs of communication. We are inundated with signs of communication with other worlds. The only question is whether we notice them, or whether we assume that there's something wrong with us if we hear some of those signs or see some of those signs. Okay, there's a bunch left, and we're going to talk about prayer. And I can't remember if it's the next session. Let's see. Kabbalah. Yes, prayer book is next session. So in the subject of prayer, there are blessings. There are thanks for the good stuff blessings, such as bread, wine, and even going to the bathroom. And there are blessings acknowledging mitzvahs before you do a mitzvah. That's one element of prayer. There's fixed liturgical prayer, the prayer of the prayer book. We're going to talk about that next week. And then simply talking to God. I've had this in private conversations with some of you. A wonderful spiritual practice taught to me by a teacher. Find yourself a quiet spot where you won't be interrupted. Put your head between your hands and simply talk to God, the truths of your heart. There's two possibilities, as I always say. One is that God exists and you have open communications with the subconscious of the universe. The second is you are speaking aloud the deepest truths of your heart. That's also pretty powerful. And we can't be sure which one is true. But I can tell you that in the case of my own life, that practice is life-changing. Another way of becoming more spiritual, and I can't remember if I've spoken about, have I talked to you about the mustard? Anybody? No? Okay. So seeing the holy in the world. You walk into a grocery store. You know, now you've got a mask on and so on, but here you are in the grocery store. So you may say, oh, I'm hurried, stuff is expensive, I can't quite find what I'm looking for, and damn, I've got to spend the next, I don't know, half hour, hour and a half shopping. A spiritual way of looking at this is to say, wait a minute, in a world where, you know, something like 40% of the people of the world don't have clean water, and many people, most people, don't have adequate nutrition. Here I am, and the food is just laid at my feet, and the cans are all in a row, and they're beautifully marked, and they're colorfully decorated, and they are clean. And we go over to where they sell the produce, and the produce gets spritched with some water. And then if you're in a really fancy schmancy place, you can even hear thunder from time to time when it's being spritched. So the broccoli should think they're still growing in the farm, and everything is clean and orderly and packaged. So reflecting on this and preparing for a sermon, I reflected on God's gift of mustard. Speaking for myself, I could probably be okay if I didn't have any mustard at all. If I have deli mustard, I am very, very happy. So in preparing for this sermon, I went to Gelson's, a very nice supermarket, and I counted the number of choices of mustard. And what did I come up with? 39 choices. So I, who would be happy without any mustard at all, have to stand there and make a decision between Grey Poupon and Gouldens and French's and coarse ground and not so coarse ground. God so loves me that not only has God given me mustard, but 39 possible choices. So I gave the sermon a few years later, different synagogue, I couldn't use mustard again. So I used olive oil. So I went to Whole Foods Market, and how many choices of olive oil do you think I found at Whole Foods Market? Not sunflower oil, not, God forbid, Crisco, not vegetable oil, but olive oil.
100.
92.
And was
Seasoned,
Popeye in there somewhere?
I'm sorry?
Was Popeye in there somewhere?
I don't recall. It was different bottles, different sizes. See, there's one that looks like it may have even olives in it. I don't know. There's extra virgin. There's sort of virgin. I never did find the slutty olive oil nor understand exactly what an extra virgin olive oil is. But think about it. We would be okay without oil. Olive oil is nice. I think it's even healthy. God gave me on this day a choice of 92 choices of olive oil. You have to notice miracles. These are signs. If you see them, if you don't see them, they are not signs. You know, there's a story of, I'm sure I've discussed this before, of people with their head in the mud when the sea split and they never saw the miracle. So notice the miracles in your life. Notice when you've been blessed, and you have to acknowledge that blessing and thank the source of the blessing. And the thank you card that God wants is sharing your blessings with God's other children. Just as most parents would say, we want our kids to share. Just as, you know, anyone would say, we want to see people sharing. And as one of my teachers pointed out, a gift without acknowledgement is a theft. And one way of becoming more spiritual is to take on new spiritual practices in your life and see how they work for you. So daily prayer, saying thank you for food and other blessings. There's no idea. Doing good deeds, taking on dietary discipline, experiment with kashrut. You don't have to go, you should pardon the expression, whole hog on kashrut. Try giving up pork. Try giving up shellfish. If you're a vegetarian, you have nothing you can give up because you're already kosher. And as I always point out, as I always say, don't let the best be the enemy of the good. Simply because you're not going to do everything, it's still good to try and to start. And then seeing yourself as God's hands. Move your prayer life, your spiritual life, from asking God not to give me, but teach me or help me and even use me. If you ask God to use you to do divine work in the world, that prayer will be answered and you will do divine work in the world. You are God's shadow, so bring God with you wherever you go. As the rabbis say, God can only be God if we serve as God's witnesses. Here are some books, and actually in the reading list attached on my website on the reading for the whole course, a number of these books are in there. This book I adore, Kabbalah, a love, oh no, that's not that one. This one, Kabbalah, a love story. Most books on Kabbalah are very difficult to understand and penetrate. Rabbi Larry Kushner wrote a fictional love story, which actually teaches about the creation of the Zohar and some deep, deep Kabbalistic insights. In fact, at some point we ought to just do a class reading this together. It is a magnificent book. And the others. This is a very short introduction. This is a very nice collection of readings. And so here are, let's see if I can do this. No, I can't. Whoops. All right, so hang on. I'm gonna cut and paste. Whoa. I don't know how to do it. Okay, hang on. What? Okay, I'm going to do the same thing we did at the very beginning of the class. I am going to go to chat. I got to go here. And I am going to paste. These are 2 links. I'm just going to leave them up for 2 classes. They're actually not public classes. Matt was hired by a congregation, and he has actually published these classes for, I guess, on his Facebook page. So they're not exactly secret, but they are wonderful. And I'll just leave them in the chat. Is there a question? Yeah, Rachel.
Rabbi, yeah, can you post those 2 YouTube sites on your website? Because I can copy something from the chat, but I don't know how to move it anywhere else, and I can't get it.
So here's how you do it. I'm reluctant to do that because I don't want to publicize it more than he has. But if you copy it, then open up a Word document and paste it into the Word document. And then you'll have it to copy and paste into your browser.
I don't know how to keep this Zoom meet class with you on and go.
Okay, so here's the answer. The last thing you do, or do it right now, is copy those things. And then when you're completely done, don't shut off your computer.
Yeah, then go.
But open a Word site and go to paste. And if you have a problem, send me an email. Okay. Maybe I'll send them out in the next email that I would.
Thank you, because I already copied one thing, and if I copy that,
yes, that would be a problem. So, boy, I have text to read, and we're done in time. So I would say if you need to run. If you want to stay and listen to some Kabbalistic texts, stay. What can I tell you? This one is actually from this book. It's from the Zohar, How to Look at Torah. And this is actually, Bryce, the concept we were talking, and Erwin and Beth, the concept we were talking about today. Rabbi Shimon said, so this is Shimon Bar Yochai, 2nd century teacher. Woe to the human being who says that Torah presents mere stories in ordinary words. If so, we could compose a Torah right now with ordinary words and better than all of them to present matters of the world. Even rulers of the world possess words more sublime. If so, let us follow them and make a Torah out of them. But the words of Torah are sublime words, sublime secrets. Come and see. The world above and the world below are perfectly balanced. Israel below, the angels above. Of the angels it is written, he makes angels spirits, but when they descend, they put on garments of this world. If they did not put on a garment befitting this world, they could not endure in the world, and the world could not endure with them. Think of PPE in a COVID ward. If this is so with angels, how much more so with Torah, who created them and all the worlds, and for whose sake they all exist? In descending to this world, if she, meaning Torah, Torah is a feminine word, if she did not put on the garments of this world, the world could not endure. So this story of Torah is the garment of Torah. Whoever thinks that the garment of Torah is the real Torah and not something else, may his spirit deflate. He will have no portion in the world that is coming. That is why David said, King David, psalmist, open my eyes so I can see the wonders of your Torah. What is under the garment of Torah? Come and see. There is a garment visible to all. When those fools see someone in a good-looking garment, they look no further. But the essence of the garment is the body. The essence of the body is the soul. So it is with Torah. She has a body, the commandments of Torah, called the embodiment of Torah. This body is clothed in garments, the stories of this world. Fools of the world look only at the garment, the story of Torah. They know nothing more. They do not look at what is underneath the garment. Those who know more do not look at the garment, but rather at the body under the garment. The wise ones, the servants of the King on high, who stood at Mount Sinai, look only at the soul, the root of all real Torah. In the time to come, they are to descend to look at the soul of the Torah. Come and see, so it is above. There is garment, body, and soul of soul. The heavens and their host are the garment. The communion of Israel is the body. He's talking now about the different Sefirot, who receives the soul, beauty of Israel. Beauty of Israel means Tiferet, and she is the body of the soul. The soul, we have mentioned, is the beauty of Israel, real Torah. The soul of the soul is the holy ancient one. All is connected, this one to that one. Woe to the wicked who say that Torah is merely a story. They look at this garment and no further. Happy are the righteous who look at Torah properly. As wine must sit in a jar, so Torah must sit in this garment. So look only at what is under the garment. All those words and all those stories are garments. I won't read this whole thing, but this is a mystical enactment or a telling of God and the goddess, namely the God, the Holy One, blessed be He, and His Shekhinah and his goddess. When the temple is built, God and His bride were united. Her face shone with perfect joy. There was joy for all above and below. As long as the temple stood, it served as a sacred bedchamber of God the King and His bride, the Shekhinah. Every midnight she would enter through the place of the Holy of Holies. She and God would celebrate their joyous union. The loving embrace of the king and his queen assured the well-being not only of Israel, but also of the whole world. The king would come to the queen and lie in her arms, and all that she asked of him he would fulfill. He placed his left arm under her head, and his right arm embraced her, and he let her enjoy his strength. Their pleasures in each other were indescribable. He made his home with her and took delight between her breasts. They lay in a tight embrace, her image impressed on his body like a seal upon a page. As it is written, set me as a seal upon your heart, from the Song of Songs. As long as the temple stood, the king would come down from his heavenly abode every midnight, seeking out his bride and enjoy her in their sacred bedchamber. But when the temple was destroyed, the Shekhinah went into exile. The bride and groom were torn apart. This relates to the idea that when the temple is destroyed, the Israelites go into exile, but God loves the exile. God loves the Jews still, even though we're sent into exile because of our sins. So God sends God's presence, the Shekhinah, with us into exile. So it's like a couple that has been torn apart. And this story, this is actually some commentary on the text. In this story, we have the Shekhinah wandering up and down the ruins of the destroyed temple. And she looks in the place of the cherubs, the Keruvim, and lifts up her voice saying, my couch, my dwelling place, where my husband would come to me and lie in my arms, and all that I asked of him, he would give me. My couch, Do you not remember how I came to you in joy and contentment, how those youths, the cherubim, would come forth to meet me, beating their wings in welcome, and so on. So it's very graphic, very sensual. Oh, that's the end. I thought I had actually had a lot more. There is so much more. There's so much more to Zohar. Your brain could explode. And you know, as I say, I have hundreds of books. I'm working my way through them, and it's magnificent. So for me, Kabbalah is a spiritual poem on Judaism. I don't take it literally. If I take poetry literally, you know, the phrase I use, if someone says my love is a red, red rose, I don't worry about whether I have hay fever. I don't worry about whether there are thorns. I don't worry about what kind of, you know, fertilizer has been used or what breed of rose. If you take a poetic image too literally, you lose the metaphor. So I take this as metaphor, and for me, it is a magnificent insight into the nature of God and our tradition. I can't take it literally because I can't believe that the horrors that exist in the world are really part of God's plan. I understand how many would find that comforting. I understand the tradition. I respect the tradition. I just can't sign up. I just can't do it. But that doesn't mean I don't find this stuff amazing. So I will take a deep breath. I know that we've gone through a lot and we're running very late, and just ask if any of you have any questions or comments or thoughts. Hearing none, you are dismissed.
Thank you, Rabbi.
And
Thank you. Good night,
see.
Rabbi.
Yeah, and so go and enjoy.
Night.
Good night, and reflect on the fact that when we do this class next week, we will probably be driving, everyone will be driving everyone else crazy about who actually won the election. And
Let's go now.
we're in for some interesting times.
Right.
Oh, God.
Talking about shattering of the vessels and chaos. I hope everyone has voted.
Good night, Rabbi.
Good night. Stay well.
Good night.
For those
Thank you.
who are in the sort of the conversion class, we're meeting tomorrow at 6 on the same Zoom channel, because I want to attend Angela's husband's presentation live. I get so much more out of it.
Did you get my email, by the way, that I have class till 6:30?
Yes, I did get your email.
I'm so sorry I didn't get back to you.
Yeah, and what I'm going to do is
driving.
I am going to be I'll be recording it,
Okay.
and I am creating a page on my website that will be secret. Namely, you will need the URL to get there. I figured out how to do that. I'm very excited.
Okay.
So it won't be something you can just click on, you know, in the menu. You will actually have to cut it and paste it. So I'm creating that page for those interested in conversion. I want people to test drive this document I'm creating to learn the prayers, and I will record our discussions because I don't want them just posted for the world to see.
Okay.
Okay, so